Thank you so much, Daisy. Just before I start, I wanted to give a plug to something which is completely unconnected to me or the Wellcome or 5x15. But it just came across my desk on Monday, and I thought it was rather appropriate to this evening. I got a press release from Athens saying that this week is Athens Flying Week. And the press release is absolutely heartbreaking because they said, in order to shrug off the yoke of despair, we're organising a flying week at Tatoi Airport because if man can still fly, then man has hope. So I sort of read this and thought, good for them. You know, I might even get on a plane once I've done this tomorrow morning and go and show my support. And then I opened the papers this morning and realised that Athens has got a general strike this week, including of aviation and all airspace. So poor old Athens, it's been completely beaten about. If the strike stops tomorrow, I just thought I'd mention it in case there are any Hellenophile aviation enthusiasts in the audience, which there might be given the lineup this evening. So if you feel like you can give a bit of support to poor struggling Hellas, then get on a plane and go to the Athens Flying Week, which may or may not be taking place. I'm delighted to be here. I love the Wellcome collection. I adore 5x15. I think it's a great idea. If you go to any of the other events, you'll find you never quite know who's going to turn up and what they're going to say and the way they're going to say it. The last time I did a talk, there was an extraordinary war photographer there who was, I think probably safe to say, absolutely tripping on morphine and caffeine because he'd come out of the operating theatre at 3 o'clock that afternoon. So, staggered onto the stage. And somebody complimented him on his man bag that he was carrying. He said, he's Scouse, isn't he? I can't do a Scouse accent. Anyway, he said, however you do it, he said, that's not a handbag. It's me blood bag. That's Yorkshire, isn't it? Anyway, but he had this blood bag with him. So it's a great thing, 5x15. I think partly because we're not allowed to plug books and we're allowed no notes. So it's sort of single-handedly keeping the art of rhetoric alive, which is a good thing. So Wellcome great, 5x15 great. Total disaster to ask me to come and talk about flight, because I have a very ambiguous attitude to men and flying, possibly a Neanderthal attitude, and I thought I might just explain. It troubles me. The idea of men in the air, men and women in the air, for some reason bothers me. It might be, I think, because I'm so steeped in classical literature, and if you read your ancients, you'll know that the ancients believed that the heavens and the skies belonged to superior beings, and men had absolutely no place there. So butterflies weren't just butterflies. They were called psyche in Greek, which means the soul, the spirit. So they thought when they saw a butterfly flying past, they thought that was somebody's soul passing them. Birds weren't just birds, they were incarnations of gods and goddesses, and of course the gods and the goddesses themselves lived high in the sky. And Aristophanes made it very clear that birds are superior to men and we should never try to inhabit their realm. This is from his comedy, The Birds. Ye children of man, whose life is a span, protracted with sorrow from day to day, naked and featherless, feeble and querulous, sickly, calamitous creatures of clay, attend to the words of the sovereign birds, immortal, illustrious lords of the air, who survey from on high with merciful eye your struggles of misery, labor, and care. So Aristophanes told us as it was. So it might be because I know all about the Greek text that I'm a bit anxious about people in the sky. If I'm really honest, and this is one of those anecdotes I'm going to regret because it will end up in the paper tomorrow, it might also be because for years I was dating a wonderful man, very kind and complex and clever, incidentally very rich. And I went into his bathroom one day and I saw next to the loo a stack of magazines. And rather than What Car magazine, he was reading What Jet magazine. And I just thought, I can't cope with that level of kind of techie testosterone. So I ended the relationship. So I think it's partly Aristophanes, it's partly this lovely What Jet man. It's also largely because of the terrible story of Daedalus and Icarus, which you will all know. Daedalus and Icarus is a story which, interestingly, since it first enters the written record in the 7th century BC, there isn't a single decade when it leaves the human radar. It's a story that we've wanted to retell and to try to understand. What you're looking at here is a fresco from Pompeii, from a priest's house in Pompeii. And actually, I don't know, did anybody go and look at the exhibition before you came in? Did you see there's a beautiful little Icarus bronze from the British Museum from the 1st century there? So we've always wanted to try to understand the story of Daedalus and Icarus, and what a story it is. You all know the tale. Daedalus was a master engineer and craftsman who was being held against his will on the island of Crete with his son by the tyrannical King Minos. Minos was a ruler not just of the land, but he was a thalassocrat. He was also a ruler of the sea. And so these two men knew there would be no way that they could escape by boat. Instead, they had to fly from Crete. So Daedalus put all his engineering skills to good work. He built some wings for himself and for his son, carefully, lovingly put them together with wax and feathers, which, just for your information, is probably a reference to the lost wax technique, which is how a lot of bronze sculpture was made in the Bronze Age on Crete. Anyway, he made these beautiful wings, gave them to his son, and off they flew. And as you know, Daedalus turned to his son and said, "Follow me. Follow me, fly low, neither too low nor too high. Follow me, and you will be safe." And they set off from Crete, with Icarus obediently following behind his father. And then that extraordinary, exuberant adrenaline rush of flying hits Icarus, and he starts to creep higher and higher and higher. He goes so high, the sun melts the wax, and he falls into the sea. And Daedalus, too late, suddenly realizes he can no longer hear the sound of feathers behind him, turns and just sees one small ripple in the sea. It's a terrible story, I think, because it seems to me, in a way, to be a story which absolutely denies everything the Wellcome collection is about. The Wellcome collection's subtitle, wherever it is a place for the incurably curious. And that story seems to be saying, never be incurably curious, know your limits. The Greeks used to say to one another, "Nothi seauton, know yourself." And they didn't mean know yourself in a kind of hippie, new agey, get to know yourself kind of way. What they meant was know your limits and know your place. And so Icarus defies all this. So it seems to me appalling that there's this story that's told that's very restrictive, that says you can't have a reckless delight in who you are. You can't be ambitious. You can't be individual. So it's terrible for that reason. But actually, there's something more poignant going on with the story of Daedalus and Icarus, I think. I don't think it's just a fairy tale or a morality tale. I think it's actually referring us to the death of an extraordinary civilization in the Bronze Age, the Minoan civilization of Crete, which did indeed burn very, very, very bright and then was snuffed out by those around it. Minoan Crete, I'm sure you know it, but produced exquisite things. This is just one of the many bits of golden jewelry from a place called Malia on Crete. This is from about 1700 BC, probably earlier. We now think it might date back to as far as 2000 BC. So the Cretans and Crete it was a special place. They were a special people who produced special things. All the stories of Daedalus, that he made these wings, were also told he designed the labyrinth for the Minotaur. He designed Ariadne's dancing floor. He designed a great robot, we hear. And slightly less attractively, he designed this enormous wooden cabin where the queen of Crete, Pasiphae, could clamber in so that her lust could be satisfied by a pure white bull who would be brought to sire her every night. And Daedalus was the man who constructed this crate for Pasiphae to climb into. So, an interesting, a varied job description he must have had. But actually, if you look at what was being produced on Crete, it wasn't quite a kind of strange shag crate. We haven't discovered that yet in the archaeological record. But we have discovered the fact that they were very, very sophisticated. They produced anti-earthquake engineering, flushing toilets, the first paved road in Europe. They were a remarkable people. And the other thing that they did is that they allowed the men of their palatial cultures to fly in the palaces. This is a bronze from the palace of Knossos on Crete, and it shows a young man flying through the air. If you know the culture, what he's actually doing, he's jumping over a bull. Bull leaping was something which we know took place. There's been a lot of discussion about whether, again, these are just stories, but actually we now know from the archaeological evidence that 100% definitely bull leaping took place in the central palaces of Crete. That's what this young man is doing. And you think you know about bull leaping. We have bullfighting still today. But what you have to do is to cast your mind back to prehistory, because the bulls that these men were leaping were not normal bulls. They were aurochs. Aurochs are now extinct. These were a prehistoric form of bull which stood 1.4 meters at the shoulder. Just get your head around that for a moment. That is a huge bull. Their head span was about this wide. Their horns went out. I can't even extend my arms to how far their horns went out. So these are great creatures that the young men of the palatial cultures of Crete and Knossos were being forced or encouraged to fly over. So I think these were men who actually flew, and that's why we get these stories of Icarus pushing things and trying to fly. Just as a complete sidebar, when I was doing the research for images for tonight, I thought, I'll just see what happens with women when they're given wings in ancient cultures. You get a few very positive images of women. There are these kind of bird goddesses in the early period, and you have winged Nike. But then apart from that, you suddenly find women with wings really causing trouble for mankind. This is the Gorgon. As you can see, she's not a welcoming figure. She's not somebody you'd want to appear at your table or your feast. She's also, can you see, she's been tattooed with these shapes, which are what we would call swastikas. So the idea is that she has power over both life and death. There are other dangerous winged women in the ancient world. The sirens, of course, who fly down and tempt Odysseus, try to lure him to his fate. Whereas Icarus, although we know that he was a fool, he's a kind of lovable fool. We understand why it was that he wanted to fly. So the story of Icarus has many interpretations, but I, just in my remaining 3 or 4 minutes, want to explain to you why, as I said, it troubles me, why the idea of man in the air is so bothering, and why I think it's incarnated in the story which then civilizations have told to one another. The civilization of Crete was a beautiful, successful, robust civilization. But what we find happening at this period in history, and I'm talking between about 1600 and 1200 BC, we suddenly find mankind getting greedy. So the civilized world has happened. Aristocrats are living in beautiful palaces. There's slavery. This isn't a utopia. There's still, it's not an ideal society, but it's a stable society, a society where men and women trade with one another rather than fight. And then we get greedy. And this, I think, is something which is in the very DNA of what it is to be civilized. It is both part of our genetic code and our greatest curse. We start to raven and yearn for that which we do not have. We're not satisfied with the glories around us. We want to have what they have just over the hill. And so the beautiful civilization of Minoan Crete is invaded by Greeks from the north. The palaces are burnt down. They're burnt with such ferocity that the stone has vitrified in a number of places. So we think what was probably happening is that incendiary bombs of olive oil pots were being thrown into the palaces, so the stone itself has actually turned to glass. And all this because one man wanted more, one civilization wanted to take over another. And I think that this is actually what we're being told when we're being told the story of Daedalus and Icarus, not that we shouldn't try to fly. It's a good thing to fly. But what we should do is be happy with what we have in our hand, rather than always reaching out, always demanding more. Icarus could have flown, he could have escaped, but because he tried to make it to the sky, he ended up in a watery grave. It's a version of the Icarus story which is painted very beautifully by Bruegel and also then memorialised by W.H. Auden. I said I was going to do a bit of poetry this evening, which I haven't done before when I've done 5x15. And I think, if you can bear it, I'd like to read you W.H. Auden's Musée des Beaux-Arts, written in 1938, about this painting. About suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. How well they understood its human position, how it takes place while someone else is eating or opening a window or just walking dully along. How, when the aged are reverently, passionately waiting for the miraculous birth, there must always be children who didn't especially want it to happen, skating on a pond at the edge of the wood. They never forgot that even the dreadful martyrdom must run its course, anyhow, in a corner, some untidy spot, where the dogs go on with their doggy life and the torturous horse scratches its innocent behind on a tree. In Bruegel's Icarus, for instance, how everything turns away quite leisurely from the disaster. The ploughman may have heard the splash, the forsaken cry, but for him it wasn't an important failure. The sun shone as it had to on the white legs disappearing into the green water, and the expensive, delicate ship that must have seen something amazing, a boy falling out of the sky, had somewhere to get to and calmly sailed on. So I'd like to dedicate this evening to two things: to the men who can fly and choose to fly, and also to those of us who are very happy that we are creatures with feet of clay. Thank you very much.